Hi folks, Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video. And for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter and guitar tutor based in Southeast London. And today I'm very excited to be continuing my video series all about practical guitar and music theory. I started this so I can consolidate all the knowledge about how to play this instrument in one place. When I reflected on the way that I learned guitar, I found that I had so many different resources. Sometimes there was conflicting information. And ultimately, I think it took me longer, not having one place to find all these things that I needed to know. So I hope that this series is going to help anyone that's interested and my current students in their journey in learning how to play guitar. And because I am starting from the absolute beginner's perspective, I'll talk about things like correct posture, which is, for instance, what I'm talking about today, all the way up into things like songwriting and how to compose and how to understand harmony and everything in between. So if this sounds interesting to you, please consider liking the video, consider subscribing. It's the best way to stay up to date with this journey and to stay up to date with the new content I'm making. And of course, it continues to motivate me to make those videos, this content, which is something I love doing. So today, like I mentioned, I'll be talking about both posture for acoustic and classical guitar. I won't be talking about electric guitar because usually you'll use a strap, and so I'll do a separate video all about adjusting the strap on an electric guitar to suit you best. So before talking about the posture that you'll use for either of these instruments, the thing that I really want to hit home is some of the more fundamental things about what makes a posture a good posture. And then afterwards, I'll talk about some of the more physical guidelines to look out for when setting up posture, starting with acoustic. So the first thing I'll say is that everyone has a different body and that everyone usually plays different sized and different shaped instruments. And as a result, it's important to understand that posture will vary from person to person. So you really do need to experiment to find something that suits you best. Now, what is a posture that would suit you best? What does this look like? Well, it's going to result in these kind of four universal things. First, it'll let you breathe easily. And this might get overlooked, but some postures actually make it harder to breathe, and if you can't breathe easily, then it's not going to help you in the least. Secondly, you want to make sure that whatever posture you have does not cause any undue strain or stress anywhere in your body. That you might notice some pressure when you're holding the instrument, when you're letting it rest on your leg and things like that, but you shouldn't notice anything sharp or anything that's sort of bugging you, because this is what will result in a repetitive strain injury. You don't want that. Thirdly, you want to make sure that whatever posture you end up with is helping you to both fret and also pick the instrument more easily. And some postures will let you do this easily, but some will make it harder and sort of that spectrum. So consider that when you're setting up your posture. And then fourthly, and finally, you want to make sure that whatever posture you have is reducing variables in your playing. Just for an extreme example, imagine you're running around in a circle on a stage, you have the instrument, you have no strap, you have a lot of variables, you're throwing it in the air, you've seen some guitarists do that, they're doing this thing, and there's so many variables, and therefore there are so many possibilities that can interrupt your ability to play it consistently. And so what we're going to try to do when setting up our posture to begin with is we're just going to try to find a way to play the instrument so that ultimately there are fewer variables, which leads to more consistent playing. Now, one other thing I'll mention is that there are people that do run around. You'll see Jimi Hendrix, doing power slides, playing and stuff. How do they do it? Well, they have forged a really intimate relationship with themselves. They understand their body well, and then they understand their instrument very well and how they relate. And developing that is sort of a lifelong kind of journey in a way. You start to understand it initially when you notice it, and then as time goes on, you start to create this kind of unique relationship with your instrument, your unique instrument. And there are models of instruments. So if you play Strat, you can probably get a very comparable Strat. But ultimately, you want to understand your instrument well, you want to understand your body well, and that's going to result in very consistent playing. And that will allow you to ultimately not only reduce variables, but then manage variables. You can introduce new variables if you want. Maybe you can walk around and see what happens. And as you introduce new variables, then it becomes all the more important you understand your instrument all the better. So now that I've said that, let's go ahead and talk about basically some guidelines, some physical guidelines when setting up your good posture. Now, this first posture I'll talk about has to do with acoustic guitar, and it will err on the side of a more conventional posture. And then when I talk about classical guitar, I'll point out how my posture that I prefer for that instrument is maybe less conventional. So here I have my acoustic guitar. This is an Alvarez Artist Series instrument, and this was the first instrument I ever had. And if you've seen any of my original songs of the videos I've done over the years, I usually am playing this actually. This was, like I said, the first instrument I had, and I didn't really add any instruments for a long, long time. And so you might notice a few things already right off the bat with this instrument. Firstly, that the body is fairly large, and secondly, that there is something called the waist. And these two things are going to play a role in the posture I choose for the instrument. So going into good posture when sitting, the first thing you want to make sure is that both your feet are flat on the floor. And to do this, you'll also need a sturdy chair. And you just want to make sure that your feet are flat on the floor, which is offering you immediately a strong foundation. And this is because with the waist, like I mentioned in my last videos about anatomy, guitar anatomy, you want to rest the instrument flush with your thigh. So I'll just lower the camera now to show you what that looks like. So hopefully you can still sort of see. Maybe I'll raise it a bit so you can still see my face. But here we go. We've got my feet flat on the floor, which I'm not going to show you, but they are. And the waist of the instrument is now flush with my thigh. The next thing I'll do is I'm going to make sure that my back is sort of straight, but we'll sort of address that later as time goes on because my back position is going to change as I start to hold the instrument. So the next thing I do is I take my right arm, and in a singular motion, as I lay my right arm / shoulder on the instrument, I then pull the instrument into me. And this is, again, getting more control, reducing variables, increasing consistent playing. So as I do this, there are two things that I'm thinking about. First is, where does my right arm / shoulder kind of area, where does that make contact with the instrument? And on this instrument, I've been very lucky because actually, given the size of the body and given the length of my arm, there's this one point in particular where the inner part of my elbow makes perfect contact with that sort of corner where the side and the top would sort of meet. And so therefore, when I sit down and I first rest the instrument down on my thigh, the thing I look out for is actually, do I have that connection? Do I feel the corner in my inner elbow? And if I do, then I say I'm already off to a good start. And the reason why this is a good position for my forearm and everything is because the natural length of my forearm lets my picking hand, or you could also you could use it for strumming. This hand is now at a really good distance, located somewhere between the sound hole and the bridge. So you want this hand to naturally rest somewhere in this position so that the strings are very accessible, again, to the picking hand. And then this is one of the other fundamental goals that you're trying to achieve with your posture. So now that I've set up all this, you can see that there is a byproduct of this posture, which is that the neck of the instrument is parallel with the floor and that the fretboard is also flat, pointing in the same direction as I'm facing. And the advantage of this is that you can see here that the neck really isn't moving a whole lot. It's not like I'm twirling the instrument around and stuff like that. And so because of that, I don't use my fretting hand at all to support the instrument. And this is a really important thing to watch out for. And I'll probably mention it again with classical guitar. But the idea here is that your fretting hand has one job and one job only, which is to fret the strings. And you can't use it, or you shouldn't rather use it. This is the only thing I'll tell you shouldn't do. You shouldn't be using it to carry the instrument. Because the thing is, you can only use the muscles in your hand really for one or the other. It's either carrying the instrument and walking around with it, or it is for the delicate maneuvers needed to correctly fret the instrument. And between those two, you know which one I'm going to choose, correctly fretting the instrument. So now that I've gone through that, I just want to go ahead and jump forward to classical guitar. But before I do that, I just want to point out that this is a very conventional posture. And you can see that, like I mentioned before, my back is fairly straight. It's sort of hunched, but not so much so that I can't breathe. So I find that this posture for me is very comfortable and I like it. Now let's go ahead and switch to classical guitar. So here I have my classical guitar, which you may have seen in the last few videos. And I mentioned, I'm just raising that again. I mentioned that my classical guitar has a different size actually than my acoustic. It is a smaller instrument. And the result is that I actually have to position it differently on my body. Now again, you can see the waist. Now, interestingly enough, traditional, and I'll just sort of start here, traditional posture for classical guitar basically goes as follows. You would basically rest it so that the waist, instead of being on your right leg, is on the inner left thigh, the opposite side of your hand dominance. So if you're right hand dominant, you'll go to the left thigh, inner thigh. And then in this position, my right leg is solid on the ground, this leg, and that my left leg is actually resting on something called a footstool. A footstool is this kind of device that you may have that basically lifts the leg up. And by doing this, it allows me to straighten my back and then bring the fretboard closer to my eye view. See? And this gives me good control. Now, there's a reason I don't use this posture, and it is because of the footstool. When we talk about reducing variables, for me, something that's very important to consider is basically, what if I don't have the footstool? What am I going to do? I should be able to play this instrument without it, right? The other thing to consider is, and it's not exactly a problem, but you do have to adjust the footstool. There are different measurements and things, and it is part of the process of, again, getting to know your body better and getting to know the instrument better. But really, I just didn't want to deal with that hassle, especially because I'd have to pay for the footstool. So the way I saw it was, why don't I create a posture for myself, a new, unconventional posture, where I get the same results of the traditional posture, same kind of control, and that all those fundamentals I mentioned earlier are still being achieved, and yet I don't need the footstool. So here's what I do, and this is my posture, and like I say, sort of unconventional. I start by resting both my feet flat on the floor. I let the body of the instrument, this larger part, rest on my right knee. And then what I do is I, again, let my right shoulder kind of hug the instrument, and you can see that the point of contact is actually different now. The point of contact is sort of my upper arm area, not the inner elbow. And so because of that, I find that by resting my arm here, it lets my elbow go out a little bit further, which in turn lets my hand rest again right around the sound hole and the bridge. And then the result is that I still get that advantage of bringing the neck closer to my eye view. And then I don't need to support the instrument. You can see here, the neck isn't moving. And so that's the advantage I get. My hand is now anchored. And now all I need to do with my fretting hand is the one job it's supposed to do, which is fret. So now that we've gone through all of that, I think the thing that I want to point out is it's important to distinguish between the hands. They ultimately are going to be doing different things and, of course, interacting with each other. You want to preserve their jobs as best you can. This is an unconventional posture for classical guitar. And so it just speaks again to that first thing I mentioned, which is that everyone has a different body, everyone's got a different instrument, and it's important you experiment with different postures to find something that works well for you. Now, that said, admittedly, when I was trying this instrument out, I noticed that the size of it was kind of small. And when I was thinking about buying it, I could have very well said, I don't want to go through the process of discovering how to position my body and this instrument so it's easier to play. But I thought, no, I'd like to, because that's part of getting to know the instrument and forging that unique relationship that I mentioned before. And so now that I have, I find that it's very easy to play this instrument. And the important thing is my back is still fairly straight, my feet are flat on the floor, I'm very stable, and I can breathe easier. There is no undue strain anywhere in my body, and I can fret and pick fairly easily as well, reducing variables. And so this just about does it for this video today. If you feel like I've missed anything, please write something in the comments below. If you found it informative and helpful, please definitely give me a like. Consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to stay up to date with the new content that I'm making. And finally, thank you to all the people that do subscribe. It means a lot. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you at the next video. Ciao for now.